Hello. This is a video about the Schell model of teaching for situated learning theories. And I'm going to share with you a model and give you some background and some information about the theories and ideas that support the model. So I'm going to share the screen now, and let's see. Yeah, it's fine. Okay. All right. So here comes the sharing. And I'm going to turn this on so that is playing from the start. So what I'm sharing now is a PowerPoint that we used with some educators in Taiwan a year or so ago, but it's the essential model, and it's the one that's published in the book that we've talked about. And you've read that, and if you haven't, you will be reading the chapter from the book that my wife and I edited and wrote that is on this topic. So anyway, okay, let's move on. The first thing is a list of ideas that are central to the model. These are theories and practices that show up. And so I'm gonna click on these and talk about each one just a little bit, and then we'll go back and then we'll look at the model itself. So I'm going to come back to cognitive apprenticeship in a minute. But I'm going to start with higher order and critical thinking. So let's think about what do we mean when we say critical thinking. It's an idea of conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, or evaluating information obtained by observation, experience, reflection, reasoning, communication, or I would throw in research, because research and evidence is an important part of all of that. And the core elements that this is connected to is the idea of learning transfer. And learning transfer, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit more specific, is being able to use a concept we've learned in this setting and be able to use it in a related or even a different setting. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But what is critical judgment? It's a thing about reflective thinking and applying information or judgment that's based on information that is in the form of a critique. So, but we're also concerned about problem solving, where we're involved with critical thinking, or creative thinking, excuse me, and finding open-ended problems and creating something new. So just a little bit more about critical thinking is that I just want to just kind of review with you Bloom's taxonomy. And I know that you probably had been exposed to Bloom in a number of different ways, but these are, when you're creating objectives for your course, and you can go back and look at the objectives I've created for this course, they're in the syllabus, and think about how that they are leveled. Lower levels, which is a recall kind of thing, or understanding, where you might have to classify or contrast or paraphrase, or be able to apply some information to another setting. So, but you see, as we go down this list, things are a little bit higher order thinking and problem solving. Then as we get into, and these would apply to your studies as a doctoral student, is now we're analyzing and breaking down things into parts. We're appraising, look at these action verbs. We're dissecting, illustrating, questioning, refuting, appraising. And then at the next step, we get into this evaluation, where we can argue, assess, critique, deduce, diagnose, and of course, critique and debate all of these things fall on evidence. Weigh, what's the quality of the evidence? How would you weigh the evidence? And then the last level is to create new knowledge, to simulate and elaborate, hypothesize, and event. So that is a little bit about creative thinking, or higher order critical thinking. So another element that you're going to see in this model that I'm going to share with you is the idea of learning in context, situated learning theories. And I'm not going to have to go over a lot of these things because you've already been reading about them, but the assumption is that learning is a function of living, and that as living human beings, we're all about, we're learning as a artifact of everyday activity. And context is, and I use the word authentic context, are critical to learning and the use of knowledge. So we have to ask ourselves, if context is so important, how real does it have to be? Well, my bias is, and you'll read about this in the book chapter, is that authentic contexts are the gold standard. Oftentimes in school-based things, we can't get to the gold standard, but we have to do the thing we do, and then we say, well, sometimes we just have to simulate, or sometimes we just have to do the best we can to make things as real as possible in the classroom. So the other dynamic is, from our perspective on this learning in context or situated learning theory, is essentially learning is social. And I just want to take a minute and underscore that idea that learning is really a social activity and less psychological. We have historically emphasized psychology as the psychology of learning, but in this case, we're assumption that because it's a function of living, and living as a social being, we learn from each other. Is one perspective more important than others? My research tends to allow me to think that social learning is more important than psychological learning. And I think that the psychology of learning has been overestimated, actually, and oversold. So, but then the last point is that COPs, and those are communities of practice, encourage the development of learning. And as you naturally move through and acquire skill, you move from a novice to a more higher level of competence. And we didn't really talk about hudagogy at this point, but andragogy is adult learning. Hudagogy is adult learning where you're learning to be independent. So, okay, well, let's trip back to the menu here, and I got to get rid of my pen, I guess. I guess I'll just do it automatic. Here we go. And so we've done higher order thinking and learning in context. I'm going to jump down and talk about learning transfer, because that's the thing. Now remember, learning transfer is the use of knowledge or behaviors from one context used in another. And we, as teachers, we often assume that if we teach something here in this class or in this context, that people are going to be able to use it over in another context to solve it. But it is really a misnomer. It's really very difficult for people to use information across context. And we know that from the research that people tend to use information they learned only in similar contexts to which they learned it. So transfer is a really sticky wicket. It is really kind of rare, and far transfer. There's different kinds of transfer. There's near transfer, far transfer, high road transfer, low road transfer, all kinds of different metaphors for transfer. But FAR transfer, like being able to use something in class and then going out and inventing a new procedure or something, would be an example of FAR transfer, and that's the intellectual home run. I put in a cricket example because we were in a country that plays cricket. Teachers arrange for transfer by in instructional activities, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But basically, one of the main tools for arranging transfer is to use scaffolding as an instructional method, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. So, but transfer also utilizes prior and new knowledge that is surfaced via learner articulation and systematic reflection. So as you go along, and you'll see from the model that we are purposely getting students to articulate what it is that they've learned and to have a systematic approach to reflecting about it. So let's go back to our menu, and let's look at instruction for that's our model. So let's just go ahead and start with the model here, and we'll come back to other pieces here in a minute. So here's the model that I've created over years of research. There are, I don't know, there's probably 20 different qualitative studies that have gone into the creation of this model, including many dissertations have been done at the University of Georgia and other kinds of research that some funded, some not, but largely based on qualitative research. So because we're really interested in authenticity and in context, I'm going to start with there. But this is a circular approach where you can start anywhere in this search. You can start your instruction with co-construction or systematic reflection or articulation, or shared experiences where you're actually in the field sharing an experience. So there's lots of different ways that you can go about starting in the instruction, and you can go back and forth. You might share, be in authentic context, get people to talk about what they know about it, and then say, okay, now let's go over here and try to put together something we know about it, and we engage in what we call dialectical conversation or constructivist instruction. And then we jump over to systematic and reflection. And we say, we ask a series of questions. So what does this mean to you? What kind of meaning does this have to you as a learner? And that's an important one. And I want to just kind of spend a second. We'll get to a little bit more detail on that in just a minute. But there's three things that I like to think about in education, particularly in career and technical education. I want people to have meaning for why they're doing what they're learning, because we as teachers, we also get that question: when am I ever going to use this crap? When am I going to use this algebra? And so students deserve an answer to that, and an answer to that is to show them how it's applied in the real world, and for them to learn about it in the real world. And then a second level of reasoning is, well, how did you come to that conclusion? What kind of evidence did you use to come to those conclusions? And I want you as a teacher to do that too, but I want you to require your students to be able to tell, to be able to articulate how they went mentally through this process and came to some conclusion. What evidence did they use? And once you have students starting to use evidence, then you're really starting to get them higher up that Bloom's taxonomy, so that they're up thinking more critically, and then applying it to practice settings. You know, what does this mean if you're out in the real world on the job? What does this mean? So okay, let's just jump in and look a little deeper on some of these things. I just want you to see where the theories are that support these things. With the shared experience, it comes from situated learning theory, contextual learning, communities of practice, and experiential learning with Dewey, um, and many others. So in terms of learning in context, I want to go back to my model here quick. All right. So let's dig in. Oh, let me go back. Sorry about that. So we might then say, all right, now that we're in a context here, how am I going to teach you? What am I going to do that is instructionally wise here? Well, our perspective is that you as a teacher and that your student are co-learners and that you are negotiating an understanding. And that is what we call dialectical constructivism, because you're using constructive dialogue to come to a common understanding. And the common understanding is based on those worldviews that we've talked about how people view context. Some people view context because they have had these real world experiences, and because you rely on those real world experiences that are built into your brain, neurologically built into your brain, you interpret the world in a certain way. And of course, my experiences are probably different than yours. And so I would might interpret the real world. And so when we have this dialectical or conversational form of instruction, I'm very interested in how you came to your conclusion. So you see how that might bounce over to the reflective part as well. So, but as a dialectical teacher, it's a conversation, not a lecture. It's listening. It's like you tell me what your experiences are, and you tell me how you're seeing this, and I'll tell you how I see it, and then we can invent an understanding. So that is the idea of co-construction. Let's just look at the theories that support it. I go back to my model. I went too fast. It is direct and indirect instruction. That comes from my own research. It's a teaching cycle for increasing independence. And when we talk about instructional methods in a little while, we're going to be talking about scaffolding, and that's part of the cognitive apprenticeship that we're going to talk about. And then again, as I said before, it's all connected with reflection. So let's return to our model, and let's see why we want students to be able to talk about what it is that they've learned. Well, we want to arrange an opportunity for you to use what students learn to arrange for transfer for them. It surfaces new and challenging ideas and knowledge, ideas that become knowledge because it's understood and negotiated. And it is functional, critical, and to creative thinking. We assess data. It gives us data for assessment, and I'll talk more about assessment maybe a little bit later in the class. And it sets the stage for the next instructional phase. Let's just go back to our, all right, here we go. Let's go back to our, and jump over to reflection. The theories behind that is mindful and purposeful research. That comes from my own research. And it can promote transfer. Transfer is not going to happen automatically. You have to arrange for transfer as a teacher. Arranging for transfer is a big part of your job, really. And reflection is most helpful in the authentic context. And so that's an important part of it. So, all right, let's go back. Let's just see what we're, all right. Purposeful examination, it's making meaning, it's reasoning, and it's about professional practice. So that's the cornerstones of reflection. And make critical thinking and reasoning visible. Surface it. It says, how did you arrive at that conclusion? A skilled facilitation is required on your part. This takes practice as a teacher, this dialectical and facilitation actually is as an expert in eliciting reflection, you have to be a skilled facilitator. And it's another bridge to creating opportunities for near and far learning transfer. All right, so that's our model. So now let's take a look at issues of cognitive apprenticeship, and those are ways that we teach for obtaining situated learning theories. Okay. In cognitive apprenticeship, there are four big elements. This one is about the content that you're teaching. The second is about the teaching methods that you might apply, and the other third issue is sequencing, is what to teach to whom when. And we have some strategies in there that you can use, and you can mix and match these kind of strategies. And the final piece is the overall sociology of the learning place. Is it situated? Is there engagement in community? And once we get engagement in communities, we're more likely to have intrinsic motivation. So let's talk about the content by looking at some of the details of the content. When we're thinking about elements of curriculum, one of the most obvious pieces is the domain knowledge. It's conceptual and factual knowledge associated with a subject. And so that's kind of the baseline. This is the material that we expect people who are participating in communities to be able to master this. And then we get into problem solving and heuristic strategies. So how do experts solve problems? What are the tricks of the trades? And the tricks of the trade are what we think of as heuristics. There are lots of examples of heuristics. The one thing that I think about a lot about heuristics is how people learn to mentally chunk arithmetic instead of thinking, 2 and 2 is 4 and then 4 and 4 is 8. What some people do is chunk that and say, okay, 2 and 2 gives me 4, and 2 and 2 more gives me 4, so 4 and 4 is 8. So what I've been able to do is chunk this little piece, chunk that little piece of arithmetic, and then add that together, and that comes up with a heuristic. It's a strategy for solving quick mental math. Experts have heuristics that they use as a teacher. You use heuristics as a teacher. Then we get into the issues of content and learning for how to select among various problem-solving strategies, and those are mental tools that you could use about how might I go about framing this problem and being able to problem solve using those strategies. And then the last one is the highest level of curriculum content, and it's like learning how to learn, teaching yourself how to learn. How do you learn? And all of these elements of curriculum are articulated in the article Brown, Collins, and Newman from 1987, which is in the cognitive apprenticeship literature, and then down below there you have the reference for it. So that's content, and all three of these parts are parts of curriculum. So the content is one of the important parts. So okay, so now let's look at some teaching methods. We see teaching method of modeling, teaching method of coaching, of scaffolding and fading, being able to articulate what it is you've learned, and reflection and or exploration. Now, when you read the articles, you're going to find that the authors say that scaffolding and fading are separate um, instructional methods. I think they're twins. And I'll get more details into that in just a second. So modeling. This is where you as a teacher do one, and then you show the students how it's done. Sometimes we say see one, do one. So you have the teacher actually do one, and then ask the student to replicate that experience. So that's modeling. Coaching is observing students and carrying out a task, and then giving hints from the sideline and saying, well, wait a minute, maybe we want to do that, or maybe we want to think about it this way. So so you're coaching as you go. It's kind of like a coach on the sidelines, is saying. And then scaffolding, which is really kind of interesting connection to Vygotsky's zones of proximal development, which we'll talk about a little bit later in this module. This is where the teacher supports an activity to help a student carry out a task. So if you're in an area, say you're doing a computer program, and the student can go so far with it, but they need a little help to take the next steps, then the teacher steps in and scaffolds over those next steps, and then moves on. And the fading part of that is once the student builds competencies, then the teacher can phase out. So you can see why I think about scaffolding and fading as complementary methods. Now, articulation is getting students to express their knowledge and reasoning and problems in problem solving. So you can articulate in a lot of different ways. You can have them write a paper, you can have them write a journal, you can have them write a book, you can have them shoot a video. You can do a wide variety of kinds of things where it's about getting the students to actually talk about what it is that they've learned, and then moving into this idea of reflection where students compare their own problem solving with that of an expert. And as I said before, reflection is important that it not be generalized, too general. It needs to be very specific about what does this mean up here, this articulation, this material that you articulated, what does it mean to you? It's about the issue of skill building. It's about ethics, but it's also about how did you resolve the problem? What kind of information did you use to solve the problem? Now, the other instructional method is issue of exploration. I think you have to be a little careful about exploration. You don't want to be so general that you say, we'll just go figure things out. But if you target it and you put parameters on it and you say explore within those parameters, I think that's a really healthy thing to do. All right, well, let's go back and pick up another element of cognitive apprenticeship, and that's sequencing. And sequencing is defined as what to teach to whom, when. And so here you have some options. Oftentimes we think about things that are that we need to lay in basics before we can move to more sophisticated things. That isn't necessarily true, but it's become habitual that we assume psychologically that you've got to build on skills. So it's not an increasing capacities is that idea that you got to start with basics, and you got to start with A, and it leads to B, and B leads to C. But you can also take an approach where you have increasing diversity with a sequence of tasks that require wider and wider skills and strategies and skills. And another approach is to give a global before local. In other words, people, remember we said that people's minds are about meaning making, and so people want to know why they're learning that, and so part of the skill of teaching is to give this local or to give this global overview. Is this is where we're going to go. This is what this is about, and then fill in the details as you go along. So, all right, well, let's go back and pick up the sociology of the learning place. Context is the driver of learning. And so the more authentic the context is, remember we're talking about experiences up here in authentic context, and the realer the better. And then one of the things that we believe, because learning is social, that people need to learn in communities of practice. And that will also generate intrinsic motivation when kids get embedded in the project and they marry into the idea. So that's an overview of the instructional model that I've created over the years. And I hope that you will find, I am convinced I can teach kindergarten with this model. I can teach doctoral students. Here we are. So I just want you to now think about this and read the chapter on this topic as part of your assignment, and it gives much more detail than I've been able to do in this little brief video. So anyway, thanks for hanging in for the video, and we appreciate it.